The weight of the silver tray felt heavier than the 3 crystal glasses it held. For Clara Vance, on her 4th shift at Aurelia, the city's most unforgivingly exclusive restaurant, every step was a tightrope walk. The plush crimson carpet seemed to swallow the sound of her sensible black shoes, but in her mind, each footfall was a thunderclap, a potential prelude to disaster. Aurelia was a universe of quiet old money, where the clinking of a fork against a plate was a carefully orchestrated note in a symphony of wealth. Clara, with her slightly too worn uniform and the lingering scent of student loan anxiety, was a discordant note. She approached table 7, a secluded alcove bathed in the soft glow of a low-hanging chandelier. This was the domain of Isabella Sterling and her fiancé, Julian Croft. Clara had been warned about them. Isabella, heiress to a real estate fortune built on ruthless acquisitions, treated service staff as part of the decor, to be ignored if perfect and loudly berated if not. Julian, heir to the Croft global logistics empire, was a ghost at her side, his handsome face a perpetual mask of placid apology for the woman he was about to marry. "Your champagne, sir." "And the Bellini," Clara murmured, her voice barely a whisper. She placed Julian's flute down with practiced ease, then the second one. As she reached to set down Isabella's drink, her hand trembled, a minuscule traitorous quiver. Isabella's eyes, the color of cold jade, snapped to the slight tremor. A shark sensing a drop of blood in an ocean. "Are you new?" she asked. The question wasn't one of curiosity, it was an accusation. "My 4th shift, ma'am," Clara replied, keeping her gaze fixed on a point just over Isabella's shoulder. "I can tell," Isabella said, a smirk playing on her perfectly painted lips. She took a deliberate slow sip of her Bellini. The last girl knew not to fill the glass so high. The effervescence needs room to breathe. It's a basic principle. "Does your training not cover the basics?" "My apologies, ma'am. I will remember that for next time." "Julian, darling, can you believe it?" Isabella said, not looking at him but at Clara, as if she were a particularly fascinating insect. They let just anyone wear the uniform these days. No standards, no grace. Julian offered a weak, tight-lipped smile. "Isabella, please. The drink is fine." "It's not about the drink, Julian. It's about the principle of the thing," she sighed, a theatrical display of world weariness. "It's about excellence. People pay a premium to dine here, to be separated from the mediocrity of the outside world. And then they bring the mediocrity right to your table on a silver tray." Clara felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. Her hands were clenched at her sides, hidden by the starched white apron. She just needed to get through the night. She just needed the paycheck. Her master's degree in art history wasn't paying the bills, and this job, demeaning as it was a lifeline. She retreated from the table, her back ramrod straight, and busied herself at a nearby service station, polishing silverware that was already gleaming. She could still hear Isabella's voice, a low, cutting murmur, punctuated by Julian's occasional placating sounds. She watched them from the corner of her eye. Isabella was a whirlwind of manicured gestures and sharp glances, while Julian was the still point at the center of her storm, his gaze drifting around the room, landing everywhere but on the woman beside him. An hour later, Clara was summoned back to the table to deliver their main courses. She carried the 2 heavy plates of seared scallops and truffle risotto with the focus of a bomb disposal expert. She set Julian's plate down first. Perfect. Then, as she leaned in to place Isabella's dish, Julian shifted in his seat, his elbow bumping the small table. It was a tiny, insignificant movement, but it was enough. The leg of the table wobbled, and a single rogue drop of red wine from Isabella's glass leapt from its rim and landed squarely on the pristine white cuff of her silk blouse. It was a minuscule stain, no bigger than a ladybug. The silence that fell over table 7 was absolute and terrifying. Julian froze, his eyes wide with horror. Isabella stared at the red dot on her cuff as if it were a mortal wound. She looked up, her face a mask of disbelief that slowly curdled into pure, unadulterated rage. Her eyes locked onto Clara's. "You," she hissed, her voice low and venomous, "you clumsy, incompetent little—" "Nothing." I'm so sorry, ma'am," Clara stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "It was an accident. The table—" "Do not make excuses," Isabella snapped, her voice rising in volume, drawing the attention of the surrounding tables. Diners paused, their forks hovering mid-air. Do you have any idea what this blouse is? It's a custom piece from Milan. It costs more than you make in a year. A year of your pathetic, worthless little life. Isabella, for God's sake, it's just a drop, Julian pleaded, his voice thin. It's not just a drop, Julian. It's a mark, a stain. She has stained me with her incompetence. She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. She picked up her wine glass, the deep crimson liquid sloshing near the brim. You know, I think it's only fair, she said, her smile turning cruel, that you get a stain too. So you can see what it feels like. Clara's blood ran cold. She took a half step back, but she was cornered, trapped between the table and a marble column. Ma'am, please. Isabella didn't hesitate. With a flick of her wrist, she flung the entire contents of the glass directly at Clara. The dark red wine cascaded through the air in a sickeningly beautiful arc before crashing against Clara's chest. It soaked her white shirt and apron instantly, a shocking splash of violence in the hushed elegance of the restaurant. The wine, cold and sticky, dripped down her front, pooling at her feet on the expensive carpet. The sharp, fruity scent of the Cabernet filled the air. For a moment, there was only the sound of Clara's sharp intake of breath and the slow drip, drip, drip of wine onto the floor. The entire restaurant was frozen, a tableau of shocked faces and open mouths. Mr. Dubois, the manager, was already rushing over, his face pale. Isabella stood there, breathing heavily, the empty wine glass still in her hand. A triumphant, ugly smirk was plastered on her face. She had asserted her dominance. She had put the little nobody in her place. Clara didn't cry, she didn't scream. She simply stood there, drenched and humiliated, her eyes fixed on Isabella. But something in her expression had changed. The fear was gone, replaced by a stillness, a profound and unnerving calm that seemed utterly out of place. It was the calm of a deep ocean just before a tsunami. Julian buried his face in his hands. "Oh God, Isabella," he whispered, "what have you done?" Isabella just laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "I've taught her a lesson." But she hadn't. She had just signed her own death warrant, and the executioners were already on their way. The aftermath of the assault was a blur of frantic activity and chilling silence. Mr. Dubois arrived at the table, his face a mixture of fury and groveling panic. His first instinct was to placate his wealthiest, most volatile patron. "Miss Sterling, please," he began, his voice trembling slightly as he gestured for another waiter to bring a wad of napkins. "Allow us to handle this. We will, of course, cover the cleaning of your blouse, and your entire meal is on the house." He shot a venomous look at Clara. "And you," he hissed under his breath, "get to my office, you're fired." Clara didn't move, she didn't even seem to hear him. Her gaze was still locked on Isabella, but it was distant now, as if she were looking straight through her. The cold, sticky wine was beginning to feel clammy against her skin, but she registered it with a strange detachment. It was happening again. The quiet life she had tried so desperately to build was about to be shattered. "Did you hear me?" Mr. Dubois demanded, his voice rising. "Get out of my sight." Isabella waved a dismissive hand. "Don't bother firing her, Dubois. I want her to clean it up, on her hands and knees, right now." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the puddle of wine on the floor. "With her tongue, for all I care." A collective gasp went through the nearby diners who were still shamelessly eavesdropping. This had crossed a line from entitled behavior into outright cruelty. Julian looked physically ill. "Isabella, that's enough. We're leaving." He stood and threw a few $100 bills on the table. "We're not going anywhere until she cleans up her mess," Isabella retorted, her chin held high, refusing to back down. She thrived on this kind of conflict. It was the only time she truly felt powerful. It was in that moment of tense stalemate that the world outside Aurelia ceased to matter. The front doors of the restaurant, heavy oak and etched glass, were suddenly thrown open with such force that they slammed against the interior walls, the impact echoing like a gunshot through the dining room. Silence fell, absolute and immediate. Every head turned towards the entrance. Framed in the doorway were two men. They were not police officers. They were dressed in immaculate, charcoal-grey tactical uniforms that seemed to absorb the light. There were no visible insignias save for a small, stylized silver falcon crest on their left shoulders. They wore earpieces and carried themselves with an unnerving, predatory stillness. The weapons they held were not standard issue. They were sleek, foreign-made carbines, held at a low ready position. Behind them, more figures poured into the restaurant. 5, 10, 20, then more. They moved with a fluid, synchronized precision that spoke of endless, brutal training. They fanned out, securing the exits, their faces impassive, their eyes scanning the room, cataloguing every person, every potential threat. Within 30 seconds, the opulent dining room of Aurelia had been transformed into a high-security lockdown zone. The hushed whispers of the diners died in their throats, replaced by the cold knot of fear. A man strode through the center of the formation. He was older than the others, his hair streaked with silver at the temples, his face a roadmap of hard-won battles. He wore the same uniform, but his carried an air of unquestionable authority. This was the commander. He moved past the terrified Mr. Dubois without a glance, his polished black boots making no sound on the thick carpet. His gaze swept the room once, cold and assessing, before it landed on table 7. He walked directly towards them, his men parting silently to let him through. He ignored Isabella, who stood frozen, her mouth agape. He ignored Julian, who looked like he was about to faint. His eyes, the color of slate, were fixed solely on the wine-drenched waitress. He stopped a respectful 5 feet from Clara, and then, to the utter, stupefied astonishment of everyone in the room, he bowed. It was not a simple nod, but a formal, crisp bow from the waist, a gesture of profound deference and loyalty. "Your Highness," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that carried in the dead silence. "Are you unharmed?" The 2 words hung in the air, charged with impossible meaning. "Your Highness." Isabella let out a choked, disbelieving laugh. What? Is this a joke? Did you hire these party store clowns, you little brat?" The commander, whose name was Thorn, did not even turn to look at her. His attention remained entirely on Clara. Clara finally broke her silence. She let out a long, weary sigh, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of a life she thought she had escaped. She looked at Commander Thorn, and her entire demeanor shifted. The timid, nervous waitress vanished, replaced by someone else, someone with an aura of innate authority that dwarfed even Isabella's manufactured arrogance. "I am unharmed, Commander," she said, her voice clear and steady, devoid of any of the meekness it had held just moments before. "A little damp, but unharmed." "We received the distress signal from your security detail," Thorn said, his eyes flicking for a moment to a small, simple-looking silver locket around Clara's neck. It was blinking with a faint, almost invisible blue light. "We have secured the assailant." It was only then that Thorn turned his head, his gaze finally falling upon Isabella Sterling. If his look towards Clara was one of reverence, the one he gave Isabella was one of utter contempt, as if looking at something foul he had found on the bottom of his boot. "Assailant," Isabella shrieked. "She's a waitress. She spilled on me. I'm the victim here." Thorn took a step towards her. 2 of his guards moved with him, flanking him like shadows. "You are Isabella Sterling?" he asked, though it was clear he already knew the answer. "Of course I am. And you will tell me who you are and what you are doing in my restaurant. Well, not my restaurant, but I am a valued patron," she stammered, her bluster beginning to crack under the weight of his intimidating presence. "I am Commander Thorn of the Eldorian Royal Guard," he stated flatly, "and you are under arrest." "Arrest? For what? Spilling some wine? Don't be absurd." Commander Thorn's expression did not change. He was a creature of pure, cold duty. "You are under arrest for a Class A violation of the Eldorian Sovereign Protection Act." He paused, letting the weight of his next words land with the force of a physical blow. "The charge is the assault and attempted assassination of a ranking member of the royal family." The word assassination sucked all the remaining air out of the room. Julian Croft's face went completely white. He understood. He finally, horribly understood. Isabella's face contorted in a rictus of confusion and terror. "Assassination. Royal family. Are you insane? That's Clara. She's a nobody. She serves risotto for a living. Commander Thorne's gaze flickered back to the girl in the wine-stained uniform. A flicker of something akin to sympathy crossed his features before being suppressed. "You are mistaken," he said, turning back to Isabella. "The woman you assaulted is Her Royal Highness, Princess Annalise of Eldoria. And in our country, an unprovoked physical attack on a member of the Crown, regardless of the method, is considered an attempt on their life and an act of treason against the state." He nodded to his men. "Take her." The two guards moved forward. Isabella, finally comprehending the catastrophic reality of her situation, began to scream. It was a raw, primal sound of disbelief and terror. "No! Get your hands off me! Julian, do something! Call my father! Call our lawyers! This is a mistake! It's a misunderstanding!" Her pleas were useless. The guards were ruthlessly efficient. They seized her arms, pulling them behind her back with practiced, painful force. One of them produced a set of heavy-duty zip-tie cuffs and secured her wrists. Her multi-thousand-dollar handbag clattered to the floor, spilling its contents. "You can't do this," she shrieked, her body thrashing against their iron grip. "I am Isabella Sterling. Do you know who I am?" Commander Thorne looked down at her, his expression one of profound indifference. "I know exactly who you are," he said, his voice cold as the grave. "You're the woman who threw wine on a princess, and you are about to discover the consequences of that." As they dragged her, kicking and screaming, towards the exit, Isabella's wild, terrified eyes met Clara's, or rather, Princess Annalise's. In that final, desperate moment, she saw no hint of the meek waitress she had tormented. She saw only the cool, appraising gaze of royalty, a look that held not malice, but a deep, sorrowful finality. It was the look of a judge who had just passed a sentence from which there was no appeal. The world Isabella had known, a world that bent to her will and catered to her every whim, had just ended. And it had all been for a single stupid glass of wine. As the heavy oak doors slammed shut behind the struggling Isabella and her captors, the silence she left in her wake was somehow louder than her screams. It was a vacuum, filled with the frantic, unspoken thoughts of every person in the room. A woman in a Chanel suit dropped her fork with a clatter that sounded like a cymbal crash. Then, like a dam breaking, came the sound. 100 smartphones, previously hidden, were suddenly raised. Clicks, flashes, and the murmur of hushed, frantic narration filled the air. This was not just dinner theatre, it was history, and they were the first to report it. Mr. Dubois, the manager, looked as though he had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. His face was the colour of old parchment. He took a staggering step toward Annalise, his hands outstretched in a gesture of pathetic supplication. "Your Highness, I had no idea. Please, forgive me. Forgive this establishment. My deepest, most sincere apologies for this egregious misunderstanding." Annalise turned her cool gaze upon him. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You were going to fire me," she stated, a simple fact laid bare, each word a precise surgical cut. "You were going to sacrifice an employee to placate a bully because her credit card had a higher limit than my dignity. Your apology is noted for its timing, not its sincerity. And it is irrelevant." A female guard with a severe face and sergeant's stripes on her collar stepped forward, holding a dark grey cashmere-lined coat. It bore the same silver falcon crest. With practiced gentleness, she draped it over Annalise's shoulders, hiding the garish wine stain. The simple act was a profound statement, re-establishing the order of the universe. Annalise turned away from the crumbling manager, and her eyes fell on Julian Croft. He was still standing by the table, a statue of impotence, the hundreds he'd thrown down looking like monopoly money in the face of this new reality. He looked at her, his handsome face a mess of shame and terror. "Annalise, Clara." "Your Highness," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I am so sorry. I didn't know how to stop her. She gets like that. I always try to smooth things over." Annalise walked toward him until she was standing just a foot away. The scent of spilled Cabernet still clung to her. "That is the most honest thing you've said all evening, Julian," she said, her voice dangerously soft. "You didn't know how to stop her. You never tried. You stood by, silent and compliant, while she savaged a person you thought was beneath you." You weren't trying to smooth things over. You were polishing her pedestal. You were not her fiancé, you were her enabler. Her first and most loyal subject. She looked at his hand, still resting on the back of Isabella's empty chair. The merger your family so desperately wanted with our sovereign wealth fund was contingent on this union. It was a test, not of Isabella's breeding, but of her character. And of yours. She gave a small, humorless smile that didn't reach her eyes. You have both failed spectacularly. Consider your business with Eldoria concluded. Effective immediately. She walked away, leaving him to be swallowed by the ruins of his future. The fallout was not just a wildfire, it was a global extinction-level event for the Sterling and Croft empires. Before the sun rose, every major news outlet was leading with the story. The videos, captured by the Royal Guard operatives who had been posing as diners for a week, were a viral sensation. There was Isabella's sneering face, her condescending tone, and the final violent wine-flinging crescendo. The internet, in its infinite and brutal creativity, had a field day. Memes of Isabella with the caption, "The vintage wine," were everywhere. The hashtag, #YeSterlingStain, became a global symbol for entitled arrogance. In his penthouse office overlooking the city, Marcus Sterling, a titan who could make markets tremble with a single phone call, watched the pre-market tickers. They were a cascade of red, a digital hemorrhage. Croft Global had already been delisted, its value evaporating in the face of a cancelled merger that had been its only lifeline. His own company, Sterling Holdings, was in a nosedive from which it would never recover. His board members were resigning via text messages that dripped with panic and betrayal. His allies, men he had made rich, were ghosting his calls. The silence from their end was more damning than any accusation. He was no longer a predator, he was carrion, and the vultures were circling. 2 days later, a haggard Marcus Sterling, his tailored suit looking like a costume on a broken man, finally secured a meeting at the Eldorian consulate. He was met not by an ambassador, but by Commander Thorne, who stood alone in the cavernous marble foyer, his presence seeming to suck the warmth from the air. "I demand to see the princess," Sterling grew, a hollow echo of his former authority. "This charade is over. I am prepared to offer a formal apology and a substantial donation to her charity of choice. Let's name a number, 1 billion, 2. We can make this disappear." Thorne's lips curled into a semblance of a smile. It held no warmth. "Mr. Sterling, you speak of your wealth as if it is a universal solvent for your problems. It is not. You operate under the delusion that your money makes you important. In this room, you are merely the father of a felon. I will sue. I will bring the full weight of my legal team down on your little banana republic." Sterling roared, his face flushed, his voice echoing in the vast empty space. "Please do," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a calm, lethal whisper. "But while your lawyers are billing you by the hour to file motions that will be immediately dismissed on grounds of diplomatic immunity and sovereign jurisdiction, your daughter is on a military transport plane. She is being extradited. Her trial will be held in Eldoria under Eldorian law. Article 17 of our sovereign charter is quite clear on matters of treason." Thorne tapped a device on his wrist, and a nearby screen flickered to life, showing a satellite image of a grey military aircraft crossing an ocean. "She is now in our airspace. She is beyond your reach." The finality in Thorne's voice was the sound of a vault door swinging shut. Sterling's rage collapsed, leaving only the cold, hard vacuum of utter defeat. He had built an empire to insulate himself from the word no, and now it was the only word he heard. The detention center's visiting room was a symphony in grey steel and beige linoleum. Isabella, stripped of her silk and jewels, wore a drab, ill-fitting jumpsuit the color of dishwater. When Annalise entered, escorted by 2 guards, Isabella's face lit up with a desperate, predatory hope. "Annalise, thank God," she said, her voice a strained attempt at camaraderie. "You have to tell them it was all a mistake, a misunderstanding. The stress of the wedding, you know. I wasn't myself." Annalise sat, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. "Which self wasn't you, Isabella? The one who mocked my work? The one who implied I was worthless? Or the one who assaulted me for a drop of wine? Isabella's mask of civility shattered. "You set me up. This was all a trap. You wanted this to happen." "It was," Annalise confirmed, and the simple, calm admission seemed to physically rock Isabella back in her chair. "It was a test. My father, the king, was considering a massive investment into the Sterling-Croft merger. He believes that character is the most crucial asset in any partner. We had heard stories about you, about your temper, about your cruelty to those you deem beneath you. I wanted to see for myself. So I became Clara Vance, art history student, struggling waitress." She leaned forward, her voice a quiet confession in the sterile room. "I will admit, I didn't think you would be quite so theatrical. We simply created an environment for your true nature to flourish. We gave you a dozen chances to be decent, and you failed everyone. You could have ignored my trembling hand. You could have accepted my apology. You could have shown a shred of grace when the wine spilled on your cuff." Annalise's eyes glinted with a cold fire. "Oh, and the table? It didn't wobble by accident. My head of security, Sergeant Rostova, was posing as a busboy near the pillar. She timed a tap against the table leg with her boot to the precise millisecond I leaned in with your plate. It was a perfectly calculated variable. We created the spark, Isabella. You chose to start the fire. The revelation was a final, devastating blow. It wasn't fate. It wasn't bad luck. It was a perfectly calibrated instrument of her own destruction, and she had walked right into it, gleefully, arrogantly. Her face went slack, the muscles twitching with a dawning cosmic horror. My father will burn your country to the ground," she hissed, the words tasting like ash in her mouth, a threat she no longer believed. "Your father is a ghost," Annalise replied, rising from her chair, "a powerful man in a world that no longer exists. You were his legacy, his queen-in-waiting. And you traded your empire for a moment of petty sadism." She walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. "You will be tried, you will be found guilty, and you will serve your sentence. 20 years hard labor at the Fort Alpenglow Correctional Facility. It's in the northern mountains. The work is quarrying marble. The wind is relentless, and the nights are very, very cold. You'll have plenty of time to reflect on the principle of the thing." The heavy steel door clanged shut, a full stop on Isabella's life. A month later, in the king's private observatory, Annalise stood beside her father. The air was cool and smelled of ozone and old brass. Below them, the capital city of Eldoria glittered like a fallen constellation, a peaceful kingdom unaware of the diplomatic storm raging beyond its borders. King Theron was not looking through his telescope. He was pacing, his regal robes swishing against the polished floor, his face a thundercloud. A generation of diplomacy, Annalise, a generation of carefully built alliances and economic partnerships, and you've jeopardized it all for a piece of dinner theater, he finally roared, his voice, usually so measured, echoing off the domed ceiling. Annalise didn't flinch. She remained by the observatory window, her gaze fixed on the city lights. "It was not dinner theater, father. It was a diagnostic. And the patient, I'm afraid, was terminal." "A diagnostic," he scoffed, slamming a data slate down on a chart table. "The ambassador from Ventria delivered a formal protest this morning. He used the words barbaric and provocation. The Western banking conglomerate has frozen our assets pending a review. They call you the Viper Princess in their encrypted correspondence. They think you are a reckless child playing with matches." "Good," Annalise said, turning to face him. The single word was as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. Vipers are silent, they are precise, and they do not strike without provocation. Let them be wary. Fear breeds respect far more effectively than hollow pleasantries signed over glasses of overpriced champagne. Their fear is not of a reckless child, father. It is of a sovereign nation that can no longer be bought or bullied. This was more than just Isabella's character, the king shot back. This was about stability, about perception. This was always about more than her character, Annalise countered, her voice dropping, taking on a steely edge he had never heard before. Project Clara was never just a moral test. While I was serving risotto and cleaning wine glasses, my security detail, the busboys and valets, were conducting a deep-scan financial audit. The Sterling-Croft merger wasn't a partnership. It was a Trojan horse. They were using shell corporations registered in non-extradition countries to launder money for the Caspian syndicate. They were planning to use our sovereign wealth fund as a gigantic washing machine. Their business practices were a rot. We were not about to form an alliance, we were about to be infected. King Theron stopped pacing. He stared at his daughter, the anger in his eyes slowly being replaced by a dawning, shocked understanding. You knew this? Before the incident? I suspected. Clara confirmed it. She paused, her gaze becoming distant. Do you know what confirmed it? A dishwasher at Aurelia named Matteo. He's 63. His son got into debt with a loan shark. The interest rate was impossible. One night, Matteo told me the company that held the loan was a subsidiary of a Croft global shipping contractor. He was terrified. He said they were gangsters in suits. That's what you don't see from up here, Father. The human cost of these clean corporate alliances. You taught me statecraft, the grand chess game of nations. Clara taught me that the pawns are real people, and their reality is what truly defines the strength of a kingdom. Isabella Sterling was not the disease, but she was its most telling symptom. Her cruelty was a reflection of the company she kept, and the empire she was set to inherit. The king looked at his daughter, truly looked at her, and saw not the girl he had raised, but the strategist she had become. The steel in her spine had been forged in the fire of a restaurant kitchen, not a royal court. He walked to the window and stood beside her, his anger finally spent, leaving only a profound weariness. The throne will be yours by year's end. I am tired, he sighed, a sound of resignation and immense pride. And Eldoria needs a monarch with clear eyes, not one who only looks at the stars. A year later, a small bistro named the Clean Slate was the talk of the town. Its owner, a chef named Leo, had been the head saucier at Aurelia. He stood by a table talking to a journalist. She was quiet, Leo said, polishing a wine glass. Clara kept to herself, but she saw everything, the way Dubois would skim tips from the busboys, the way Isabella Sterling treated everyone. She saw it all. After everything happened, I thought I was finished. Aurelia was a toxic credit on my resume. Then I got a letter. He smiled. From the Clara Vance Foundation, offered me a no-interest loan to start my own place, said my talent shouldn't be wasted. Now half my staff are from the old restaurant. We have profit sharing, health benefits, dignity. The journalist leaned forward. So you believe Queen Annalise's new bill is a good thing? Leo stopped polishing the glass and looked around his bustling, happy restaurant. It's not a bill. It's a promise that the people who serve the food are just as important as the people who eat it. Clara made that promise. The Queen is just keeping it. In the grand royal study, sunlight streamed through the tall arched windows, illuminating the faces of the three men standing before Queen Annalise's desk. They were the leaders of the Silver Spoon Syndicate, the consortium of Eldoria's wealthiest hoteliers and restaurateurs. Their leader, Lord Valerius, a man whose face was a mask of aristocratic disdain, held a data slate as if it were a soiled napkin. Your Majesty, Valerius began, his voice dripping with condescension, with all due respect, this Hospitality Workers' Bill of Rights is an absurdity. It grants service workers emotional distress leave. It mandates profit sharing. You are dismantling a centuries-old social contract. Annalise leaned back in her chair, the weight of the crown on her head feeling less like a burden and more like a fulcrum. The contract you speak of, Lord Valerius, was written by one party and forced upon the other. It is not a contract, it is a charter for indentured servitude with better uniforms. You are disrupting the very nature of service, another of the men sputtered. It will destroy the economy. Our margins are already thin. The nature of service is to provide comfort and care, Annalise replied, her voice dangerously calm. Not to absorb the pathologies of the powerful. For too long, men like you have used your status as a shield for your cruelty. You believe your money buys you the right to be monstrous. She looked directly at Valerius. I know for a fact that your flagship hotel, the Gilded Spire, fines its housekeeping staff for taking more than one 15-minute break in a 12-hour shift. I know because I spoke to them. We rode the 3 a.m. bus together. Valerius's face paled. A soft knock at the door preceded the entry of Commander Thorn. He bowed, his gaze sweeping over the syndicate members with cold indifference. "Your Majesty, the final impact assessments and the quarterly reports you requested." He placed a slate on her desk, deliberately ignoring the others in the room. Aurelia filed for bankruptcy 6 months ago. Their clientele vanished. Mr. Dubois now manages a budget hotel by a motorway. As for Julian Croft, Thorn's lips thinned, he attempted to rebrand as a philanthropist. The Clara Vance Foundation for Service Worker Dignity publicly rejected his 9-figure donation. Their press release stated, "We do not accept guilt money from enablers." He is, for all intents and purposes, a ghost in his own life. Annalise nodded. "Show them the Alpenglow report, Commander." Thorn swiped the screen, and a high-resolution video filled the air above the desk. It showed a bleak, wind-swept mountainside under a colorless sky. The only sound was the howling of the wind and the rhythmic metallic chink, chink, chink of steel on stone. Figures in grey chipped away at a wall of white marble. The camera zoomed in on one. Her face was raw from the wind, her hair hacked short and matted with dust. Her hands, once objects of manicured perfection, were wrapped in crude, bloody bandages. She swung a heavy pickaxe with a clumsy, exhausted motion, her body a testament to broken pride. It was Isabella Sterling. There was nothing in her eyes. No rage, no defiance, just a vast, empty landscape of consequence. "This," Annalise said, her voice cutting through the horrified silence of the syndicate men, "is the social contract you defend. The right of the powerful to dehumanize the powerless. This is the end result of believing your comfort is more important than another's dignity." She swiped the feed away. The Clara Vance Foundation, by the way, was not some grassroots organization. It was established by royal decree 6 months ago, secretly funded by the assets seized from the Sterling Croft criminal enterprise. It provides legal aid, mental health services, and union support for every service worker in this kingdom. It has teeth, gentlemen. And it is very, very sharp. She picked up the heavy royal pen, its golden falcon seal gleaming. "People think I was pretending to be a waitress. They are mistaken. For years I was a princess, but I knew nothing of my people. Clara wasn't a disguise. She was an education. She was the part of me that understood exhaustion, fear, and the quiet humiliation of being treated as invisible. Annalise knew how to command a room. Clara learned how to read one from the shadows. The test was never just for Isabella. It was for me. To see if I had the courage to truly see my kingdom, not from a throne, but from my own 2 feet on a crimson carpet." She looked at the 3 pale, trembling men. "You are free to protest this bill. You are free to close your businesses in defiance, but you are no longer free to break the spirits of my people for profit. The age of the sterling stain is over." With a firm, steady hand, Annalise signed her name to the bill. The ink flowed, dark and permanent. The signature was not merely an act of law, it was the fulfillment of a promise made by a waitress in a wine-stained apron, now kept by a queen. She placed the pen down and looked up, her eyes holding the cold, clear light of the mountains. "This is the age of the clean slate. Now get out of my study." The silence that followed was broken by a dry, contemptuous chuckle from Lord Valerius. He straightened his waistcoat, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. "A charming performance, Your Majesty. Truly, but a signature on a piece of paper does not change the flow of capital. You have made your point. Now, let us speak of reality. The syndicate controls 70% of this city's liquid assets. We will move them offshore by sunrise. Your treasury will collapse. Your little foundation will be bankrupt by noon. You will be a queen of ashes. This bill will be repealed, and we will install a more reasonable prime minister. This is the real social contract." Annalise simply watched him, her expression unreadable. "Is that a threat, Lord Valerius?" "It is a market forecast," he sneered. "I see." Annalise tapped a command into her desk console. "Commander Thorn, please activate the Valerius protocol. All assets." Thorn nodded once. "As you command." Valerius laughed again, a harsh, grating sound. "Protocol? My assets are held in encrypted sovereign-backed accounts from Ventria to the Cayman Islands. Your little kingdom's hackers couldn't crack them in 1,000 years. Who said anything about cracking them? Annalise said softly. While my team was auditing Sterling Croft, they found irregularities, payments to offshore accounts that matched, to the dollar, certain political donations. We followed the money, all of it. For 6 months, we found that 80% of your sovereign-backed accounts were, in fact, shell corporations owned by the Caspian Syndicate. The same criminals Sterling was laundering for. It seems the rot in our hospitality industry went all the way to the top. The colour drained from Valerius's face. The third man, a quiet lord named Aris, who had yet to speak, flinched. We presented our findings to the International Anti-Crime Commission 2 weeks ago, Annalise continued, her voice like chipping ice. As of 30 seconds ago, all of those accounts have been frozen. Not by my authority, but by theirs. The assets are being seized as proceeds of crime. Your market forecast was inaccurate. You don't control 70% of this city's assets. You control nothing. Valerius stared, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He looked at his 2 companions for support, but the second man was already backing away toward the door. Only Lord Aris remained, his face a mask of conflict. You wouldn't dare, Valerius whispered, the threat gone, replaced by the thin whine of a cornered animal. I would, Annalise said. And I did. She then turned her gaze to the silent man. Lord Aris, you have been very quiet. Aris swallowed hard, his knuckles white where he gripped his hands together. Your Majesty. It's all right, Annalise said, her tone softening almost imperceptibly. You can drop the pretense. Lord Aris took a deep breath and stepped away from Valerius, turning to face him. I'm sorry, Valerius, but my loyalty is to the crown, and to my daughter. Valerius looked at him, uncomprehending. Your daughter. What does she have to do with this? Last year, Aris said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage, my Alara took a summer job as a concierge at your gilded spire. A guest, one of your Caspian investors, made improper advances. She reported him. Your manager fired her on the spot for inconveniencing a patron. When I called you, you told me it was the cost of doing business. Annalise's voice cut in, cold and precise. Lord Aris contacted my office the next day. He has been my eyes and ears inside your syndicate ever since. Every meeting, every backroom deal, every whispered threat. It was all recorded. He was my secret ally. The final piece of the puzzle. The betrayal was the final blow. Valerius staggered back, clutching his chest, his face a grotesque mask of shock and ruin. He had been outmaneuvered, dismantled and exposed, not just by a princess he'd underestimated, but by a peer he had wronged. His entire world, built on a foundation of intimidation and dirty money, had been demolished in under 5 minutes. Guards, Annalise said, her voice ringing with finality. Escort Lord Valerius to the Ministry of Justice. He has an appointment with the Anti-Corruption Task Force. As they dragged the sputtering, broken man from the room, Annalise rose and walked to the window, looking out over her city. The age of the sterling stain was truly over. It hadn't ended with a signature, but with a surgical strike against the rot that had festered in the shadows for far too long. Weeks later, the bistro, the clean slate, was bathed in the warm glow of evening. The air hummed with happy conversation and the clink of glasses. Annalise sat at a simple wooden table by the window, wearing a simple blue dress. Across from her sat Leo, the chef, and Matteo, the former dishwasher, now a sharply dressed member of the Clara Vance Foundation's board. Heard the news about the Gilded Spire? Leo asked, placing a plate of perfectly seared scallops before her. The foundation helped the staff form a co-op. They bought it out. They're renaming it The Sovereign. I heard, Annalise smiled. And Matteo, how is your son? Matteo's eyes welled with tears he didn't bother to hide. The foundation's lawyers. They proved the loan was predatory. The debt is gone. My son, he is free. He starts his apprenticeship next week. At the palace kitchens. He looked at her, his expression one of profound, overwhelming gratitude. You did not just give us a Bill of Rights, Your Majesty. You gave us back our lives. Annalise picked up her fork. The weight of it felt right in her hand, not too heavy, not too light. It was just a fork, but in this room, surrounded by these people, it felt more powerful than any scepter. The quiet dignity of this place was the true treasure of her kingdom, a treasure she had to become a waitress to discover. "Call me Clara," she said. "Tonight I'm just Clara."